Hello and welcome to tonight's show. We've had some technical difficulties, but we are here now. You can hear me. I can't hear you, but I know you can hear me, and that's what's important. Tonight, we are talking Sublime. Not only are we talking Sublime, we are talking about the Sublime documentary from 2019. It never came out. I have managed to see this documentary, and I have a lot of thoughts. I am a big Sublime fan. I'm maybe not as knowledgeable as I am with like Misfits stuff, but I know a couple of things, and I got some thoughts here. I got some thoughts. I wanted to discuss them with you all. The Sublime story is an interesting one. I think what people gravitate to Sublime for a lot of reasons. A lot of reasons. Okay. There is first and foremost the music. The music is incredible. I think also people love Sublime because it's like a means of discovery of other music, because Sublime and Bradley and the guys were so eclectic in their influences and wearing their influences on their sleeve and weaving things in and out of songs. Um they they uh they sort of left this, like, what is this, what is it, like this, they allow their fans and listeners to go down this rabbit hole of their influences and discover that. So I think there's that aspect. It's kind of like, what it's kind of like, it's kind of like the way Quentin Tarantino borrows from so many different places. Quentin Tarantino, he takes from this and this and this and this, and he sort of weaves it together with his own style and flavor, and you get something like Kill Bill or Pulp Fiction or Reservoir Dogs. And it's the cultural references, and that's what Sublime does. They're sort of in touch with musical pop culture from all these different, it's not pop culture, it's subculture. They're in touch with musical subculture from all these different places, and they find a way to just sort of blend it, fuse it together in this incredible fashion. Now, they weren't the first to do this, and we know this. In my last show that I did about Sublime, we talked about Fishbone and we talked about the Bad Brains. There were other bands out there that sort of came before. I mean, even the Clash, which are mentioned in this documentary that we're about to speak about. But I think that's just part of the appeal of Sublime. Like, again, just doing all these things. That's not new. That's not like some hot take. Everybody knows that. The next thing I'm going to say, though, is not something I think people talk about enough or maybe explore enough. I think what makes Sublime so interesting outside of the music is the story. It's a story, man. And it's about to be turned into a biopic. They're currently dramatizing the story of Sublime, and there's great source material. The story is almost a mythology, if you will. It's a tragedy, man. It's a tragedy of a guy who came from, a well-off background, but, felt this need to, consciously take drugs and experiment with drugs until he became addicted to them. And then basically, the whole thing turned into a sort of it's just a matter of time. Bradley couldn't grasp sobriety, couldn't get it. And, kept using, and what usually happens in those situations, it winds up in three different ways: jails, institutions, or death. And so that's how the Sublime story ends. But the weird thing about Sublime too is that it's also a story of sort of rebirth or afterbirth or aftermath, because right after the band ends, right after the band literally ceases to exist, the band ceases to exist by force the moment that Bradley takes his last breath. He's the heart and soul of the band. When that happens, the band ceases to exist. And from that point on, a different story begins. And that's a story of this, thing that basically ostensibly was never going to come out, somehow miraculously does make it out and is able to be released, and ends up selling millions and millions of copies. It becomes, it breaks through into the mainstream. And this had been a trend that, and you got to excuse me, I have a sore in my mouth. I have like behind my tongue, I have like this thing, and it's I was sick. It's like viral, so it's kind of hard to talk. So you have to excuse me. I'm trying to do a lot of talking when I really can't talk. So you have this trend that's kind of happening in the 90s, right? Like you have these bands that are coming out of these sort of subcultures and then breaking through into mainstream music and selling just millions of copies. And three examples, like really you could say even three examples in particular, and all of them under the guise of alternative rock. You have Nirvana. Nirvana was the big one, right? Followed by Dookie, which ironically happens right as Kurt Cobain dies, right? Kurt Cobain dies in 94. Nirvana ceases to exist. And then at the same time, Dookie is released by Green Day and explodes in a similar fashion. And then 2 years later, just as the band Sublime dies, Sublime self-titled explodes. And I guess you could say it happened as well with the Offspring. The Offspring, I think that happened a little bit later. I don't know when their big album came. I don't think it was in 94. I think it was later than 94. I think maybe it was 98. No, it couldn't have been 98 because that was the follow-up. Americana, right? It was 98, 99. So it had to happen. Maybe it was like 97, 96. If somebody knows, please go look that up and let me know. So you had Offspring, and I guess you could say the last one really would be Blink 182, right? Those were like, trying to think if there was anything else. Could you include the Red Hot Chili Peppers in that? I don't know, because the Red Hot Chili Peppers kind of came from like, an underground sort of scene and exploded with blood sugar sex magic, but not in the same kind of way. They weren't like, I don't know. It's not the same. It's not the same. At least it's not the same as these other bands, which kind of like fell into, alternative music labels. So they went from these subcultures to all of a sudden being played in every bar across America, homogenized for all of America, that sort of thing. So that's the second half of Sublime's story, right? So you have these like two halves, the life of the band and the afterlife of the band. And the tragedy, the hook of that after story is all these people are getting into Sublime. All these people are falling in love with this band. They're falling in love with this voice. And this dude isn't even alive anymore. This dude has died. He's died. Nobody even knows. The guys in the band, Bud and Eric, they're like, okay, well, let's get something else together. And they get their, the posse, the whole crew from Long Beach. And, they put together a new band. We talked about this in the last episode. You got Diet Brad. Ross One is like the Diet Brad. He's like kind of like the centerpiece along with Opie, who designed the Sublime Sun. And, and Miguel's there at first. And you got Jack, who plays Rivers of Babylon with Brad on 40 ounce, Tim Wu, you have Marshall Goodman, and you have Bud. You have this, and of course you have Eric, and this is the remnants. They're trying to make the best out of a really, really bad situation, and they can't. Oh, well, they do, but just with limited success when compared. I mean, when you listen to What's that song? Sunny Hours. And listen, I don't want to like slam Long Beach Dub All-Stars. They were very good at what they did. It was never my thing. I was never big into them, and it just wasn't. I just never vibed with it. But that when you listen to Right Back and you listen to that song, God, what's it called? When you listen to what is it called? Sunny Hours. Sunny Hours sounds to me like it sounds like What I Got Redux. You know what I mean? They're like, how can we repackage What I Got? It's almost kind of like, and again, I don't want to slam the songwriting here, but it just sounds to me, which by the way, I found out recently that song Sunny Hours was co-written by none other than Fat Mike himself. It just sounds like a desperate attempt to trying to ape the Sublime sound and get a hit as a result. So it doesn't feel genuine, or as genuine, or I don't know. Just it doesn't really work for me. But again, let me digress. Why do I bring up the first part of the band and the second part of the band? It's very important because it seems that everybody kind of knows or has a gist of the first half of the story. I mean, I guess even the second half through interviews and stuff, but the first half, we got something called Stories, Tales, Lies, and Exaggerations. And that came out in 98. And it's a great, you know what it is? It's a documentary, but it's a very sort of casual hodgepodge of people in the Sublime camp, just kind of generally talking about the story. They tell the story, and it's pretty honest, and you could tell maybe some things are left out, but it's a pretty raw look. It's a pretty raw look at the band, and and the title is perfect: Stories, Tales, Lies, and Exaggerations. It's not promising to be the definitive documentary about Sublime. It's just, hey, this band isn't around anymore, and we're reminiscing about it. That's kind of what it is. It's like you're sitting around a campfire and you're just sort of like hearing just various tales. And, everybody who's in this documentary is somehow connected to the band. And it's a who's who. If you are a big fan of Sublime, then a lot of these people. They're very familiar to you. You have like the Ziggins, you have guys from Falling Idols, you got Mike Watt from the Minutemen. It's been years, decades even, since I've seen Stories, Tales, Lies, and Exaggerations. I have it right over there. In fact, I'm actually going to rewatch it now. Now that I've seen the 2019 doc, I want to rewatch it and just to better compare and contrast. I probably should have done that before I even hopped on here and started doing this show, but whatever. It is what it is. We've had enough trouble just trying to get this show up and running, and now here we are doing it. So, Story, Tales, Lies, and Exaggerations. It does a great job at, again, hey, sit around the campfire and hear stories about this band Sublime. There's no like overarching narrative. It just sort of goes from thing to thing, and it doesn't really care. You know what it is? Stories, Tales, Lies, and Exaggerations doesn't really care whether you're familiar or not with the band. They don't care. You're either in the know or you're not in the know, and there's some stuff that you'll enjoy, and maybe there's some stuff you won't get because you just don't understand what it is. Stories, Tales, Lies, and Exaggerations leaves plenty of the stuff out. It's not definitive. It doesn't claim to be definitive, and it's not definitive. The Sublime documentary from 2019, however, in the synopsis on IMDb, I'm going to read it for you right now. This is what they say. Iconic California band Sublime fused reggae, punk, ska, dub, and hip-hop into a genre-defying new sound that electrified diverse audiences and airways in the mid-1990s. This definitive documentary charts their meteoric rise, tragic end, and lasting legacy. I would say that really that lasting legacy part is not really true at all, because the movie basically, spoilers, Brad dies, and the movie ends right after Brad dies. It's really kind of like, I was kind of shocked that it just sort of stops. The movie just sort of stops. Now, here's the thing. This doc is really, it's not all bad. It's, there's a lot of great stuff in it. There's a lot of interesting tidbits and factoids that I didn't know. And it was really great. I learned a bunch of stuff watching it. There's a bunch of unseen photographs and a bunch of unseen video that I'd never seen. So that was cool. I got something fresh and new from the documentary. However, again, going back to this idea that the Sublime story really happens in two parts. It happens with the life of the band and then the life after the band and the big curtailing of success. This movie really only tells that first part of, or an overview. It's such a general overview. Now, who they got in the doc, they got a lot. I mean, they got everybody, not everybody. They got a lot of incredible people. They didn't get everybody. And actually, that's a point of contention that I want to bring up. and maybe you can say, hey, you're scrutinizing this thing. Any real fans, I mean, any casual fan will be perfectly happy watching this. But that's the thing. If you're going to call this definitive, then it's gotta definitively cover the full story, and it doesn't do that. Unfortunately, it doesn't do that. Now, the whole story is only 90 minutes long. It's 93 minutes long. Okay. I feel like this movie probably has first of all documentaries. This is my intro that got cut off because of my mic wasn't working. So after I take a sip of seltzer, I'm going to kind of go over that again about documentaries. Okay. Here's the thing about documentaries. Documentaries are, they are really good. They are really good vehicles for the telling of history. And generally, the problem with the telling of history is it doesn't really always align and fit with feature length narrative or feature length documentary. If you want to, if they wanted to be really, really, really detailed with this Sublime story, it probably needed to be at least another half-hour long minimum. And it probably, to really be definitive, probably needed to be closer to 2.5 hours to truly encompass the narrative, And so that leads me to think, and again, I'm saying this from a point of view perspective of someone who is a filmmaker. I'm a filmmaker myself. And, I get the feeling, do I actually know? I don't actually know. But I get the feeling that this doc probably had a much longer running time. How long? I don't know. Sometimes assemblies to movies can be hours and hours and hours and hours long, 4 hours long, 3 hours long, 5 hours long. Look at the Justice League Snyder cut. Zack Snyder's Justice League cut thing is friggin' 4 hours long, dude. How long is a Justice League movie? 2 hours. Well, that's a little bit different story. It's more complicated here. I just want to take a quick minute to shout out some people. We have Reed. Reed is in the audience. He says, let's go, Jeff. Stoked to be here. Stephen Nash says, just FYI, the drummer and bass player are still playing shows of Sublime. Don't know who is singing. They're actually playing at the end of this month at the 3-day festival in Redondo Beach. So that's a whole other story, Stephen. And I'm going to actually FYI you, my friend, the drummer and bass player are not actually doing that. There is a band called Sublime with Rome playing, but Bud is not in that band, and Eric is not playing bass for that band. It's just the guy Rome. So this guy Rome and has a band ironically featuring the bass player from No Doubt, Tony Kanal, who used to, be really good friends, really close with Sublime back in the day, because No Doubt and Sublime did a lot of shows. They did tours together. So ironically, your FYI is not really much of an FYI. And in fact, that's not true. They're called Sublime with Rome, but Bud, Eric, and Brad are in the band, dude, or they're not like, Eric is out, is off, off tour right now. I don't know what his deal is. I don't know what the status is. I agree, Sean. It really is insane that Universal has shelved it for 4 years, but I kind of understand why to an extent, a little bit. Dan is here. Hey, Dan. Dan says, I've been a big Sublime fan since the 40 ounce days. I never got to see them live though. Neither have I. So yeah, been dying to see this doc since I heard they were making it. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the doc now. Let's actually talk about the doc. That's the problem with the doc. It feels like it was heavily edited. Okay. They've got a lot of great interviews. Who's interviewed in the documentary? You've got Bud. Bud is in the documentary. You've got Eric Wilson in the documentary. Troy, Brad's widow, she's in the documentary. You have Nowell, his dad. What the hell is his dad's name? Crap. They call him Papa Nowell. What the hell is his name though? No, John Nowell. What the hell is his name? This is driving me crazy. The dad is in the doc. His mom is in the doc. Kelly, his sister, is in the doc. Gwen Stefani is in the doc. Tony Dumont from No Doubt is in the doc. Tony, Tom Dumont, what the fuck is his name? Whatever. I'm really bad with names here. See, this is where the people from No Doubt are in this documentary. Okay. They're in the documentary. Jim Nowell. Thank you. God, that was at the tip of my tongue. Jim Nowell is in the doc. I saw Long Beach Dub All-Stars. Yeah, we were talking about them a little bit earlier. We were talking about, I was expressing, and again, I'm not going to reiterate this all again, but I was just expressing how I feel like Sunny Hours really just feels like a desperate attempt to sort of repackage what I got and get another hit. They got another hit with it. So I don't know. In any case, who else is in the doc? All right. This was a big one. This was awesome. This gave me like when I saw this gave me a lot of goodwill for this documentary. I was super stoked when I saw that Fishbone. You had Angelo Moore and Norwood Fisher are both in the documentary. And the reason why that's so rad, the reason why that's so important to me is because those dudes were a huge influence on Sublime. And they're never mentioned. They're never really brought up, man. They never, like, the thing about Fishbone is they're a band's band and bands love and revere them. The Chili Peppers revere them. Sublime revered them. You know, so many people revered them, but like they never really got their due. But they were doing something very similar to what, you know, Sublime was doing. They were more ska than they were punk, but they were doing, they were going from heavy metal and, you know, punk rock to funk to ska, to even some reggae stuff. They were doing the same thing, man. And Sublime used to cover Party at Ground Zero. You could find it out there. There's a Sublime cover of Party at Ground Zero. It's pretty awesome. And you can kind of see, you know, when you listen to some of the stuff that Angelo's doing, Fishbone came first established themselves in 1979. So they predate Sublime by a good 10 years, man. Point being is they were bros with Sublime. And they were included in the documentary. That was a big plus for me. So they're in the documentary. John Phillips, who was the manager, he's in the documentary. You had, who else was in that documentary? You had Miguel is in there for a few moments. You have, I mean, they have a lot of people. Now, here's some glaring, they have Marshall Goodman is in the documentary. Here's some glaring omissions in the documentary. And this is going to bring me back to that point about documentaries and, you know, the documenting of history. And, you know, really the truth of the matter is all a documentary is, it's a history by the people telling the documentary, you know, so whoever's telling that documentary, who is it behind the documentary that is, you know, pushing a certain type of agenda, you know, full steam ahead. Here's the glaring omission for me. Again, the fact that there was like, you had no Mike Watt, you had no friggin' Falling Idols. Here's a big one. This is the big one that really had me just sort of shaking my head. There wasn't a single Ziggin. Okay. The band wasn't even mentioned. You know, for any even casual Sublime fan who is familiar with the acoustic cover of Big Salty Tears knows that the Ziggins were kind of like the brother band to Sublime. The Ziggins and Sublime, they go way back. They were tandem together, you know. So while yes, No Doubt and Sublime were also kind of like brother bands or brother sister bands, like the Ziggins were such an integral part of the Sublime story, mythology, or whatever you want to call it, cast of players. Oh, Opie's in the doc, which is good. I'm glad Opie was in the doc, but they are so important. Todd Zulkins is in the doc. The Ziggins are such an important part. You see the Ziggins plenty in Stories, Tales, Lies, and Exaggerations. They're there. They're all over the place, telling stories and whatnot. But the fact that they didn't have one of these dudes, not even just one, you know, as Dan is saying, Bert was Brad's best friend, man. But the point is that all those dudes were tight with Sublime. In fact, you know, they completely glazed over Miguel, and that's another huge glaring omission that I want to discuss in a moment. But the way that Miguel first even kind of got to know the guys in Sublime was because he was in the Ziggins. and the Ziggins played shows with Sublime. And then Miguel said, hey, I need to record a band for my college project. Will you come down and we'll start recording. And that's how the band even started to really that's how the band jumped from doing 4-track to like getting into their first studio and like actually laying something down. And, you know, again, I could do such a fucking deep dive on 40 Ounces of Freedom. Like I would love to talk about all the minutia of this album and how it was made with such a punk rock spirit, like the way they did that. It's just such a wonderful story. And you know, that's the thing about the Sublime story. It's, even though it was such a condensed period of time, it's such a vast, deep, rich story. Like there's no way to sort of gloss over this. And that's what this documentary is for. It's for casual people who don't know the band. You know, they want to pop in for 90 minutes and you can't consider that definitive. The problem with the Sublime story and this documentary is that in order to do it right, in order to tell the story right, it really needs to be a miniseries. That's what it needs to do. Okay, that's what you need to do. The Sublime story should start somewhere. There should be the origin episode that brings you up to the recording of 40 Ounces to Freedom. 40 Ounces to Freedom. Then you go into 40 Ounces to Freedom, right? And they sort of start gaining, people are buying 40 Ounces to Freedom out of the trunk. They're selling tapes out of the trunk. Bud leaves the band. And we're going to talk all about that in a second as well, because that, again, another huge omission from this sort of documentary, downplayed. A lot of stuff was downplayed. Bud leaves the band, and that's when, you know, a series of drummers rolls in. First, you have, I believe this is the order. Don't quote me on this. I could totally be wrong. Again, this is where I'm a little faulty, a little patchy with my Sublime history. I believe it was Marshall Goodman, right? It was Marshall Goodman, and then Marshall Goodman bounced because of the drugs, and Kelly Vargas came in. Kelly Vargas isn't even interviewed. How could you have Kelly Vargas was there for an entire year of the band as their drummer? How could you not, or at least half a year, how could you not interview Kelly Vargas, man, who did so many friggin' live shows? There's a version of the band, an era of the band where the band was expanded to a 4-piece, okay? And, you know, it's interesting. I didn't realize that Sublime, this is something that the documentary taught me. Sublime was a 4-piece before Miguel came into the band, you know? So here's the thing. After Miguel leaves the Ziggins, well, hold on, I'm getting ahead of myself. There was another member. There was a keyboard player, okay? And then what happened was he leaves, that they kind of push him out, and they go back to just being this 3-piece again, right? Which is cool. I mean, it's kind of cool to, like, you know, learn little factoid like that. But when you think about the true 4th member of Sublime, it's not Lou Dog, it's fucking Miguel, dude. So during Wall, I don't know, this part's a little scratchy for me. I wish I had some clarification on this. Maybe Reed knows. Reed in the comments might be able to clarify this for me. Okay. Friggin' shit. What was I just saying? Miguel, he's recording the band, recording 40 Ounces to Freedom. And at some point he starts playing live guitar. He is kind of like, I don't know if he's lead or if he's just second guitar or if he's rhythm guitar, but he fills out the live sound. Now, the thing that's amazing about Sublime is a band with such a powerful rhythm section with Eric and Bud that Brad wasn't even playing guitar half the time when they were doing live shit. Like, if you listen to any of like those live shows, you listen to like Memories or whatever, you know, just any live show with Sublime, you know, and Brad's clearly, you can't see it, but you can hear it. But Brad's probably got the mic like this, and it's just Bud and Eric on bass. And there's such a powerful rhythm section that the band can hold down a groove where it's just bass, drums, and friggin' vocals, okay? And they still sound amazing. When you add Miguel as a second guitar player into that equation, you have an unstoppable band. And, you know, there's video of this. You can see the No Doubt album release show. It shows them on stage. It's not they're not a 4-piece, they're a 5-piece because they got Todd Foreman, who was also interviewed. I'm glad Todd was there. But, when I think about like, and again, I don't know, maybe Todd was around the whole time, although Todd also has claimed in interviews, he's like, when the drugs got crazy, much like Marshall Goodman, I also bounced. Meanwhile, Miguel, he was there the whole fucking time. He was there through it all, So you have 5 guys on stage, 5 guys. That band was unfriggin' stoppable when they had Miguel playing guitar and he's doing samples live. He's thickening. He's backing up Bradley with the vocals. It's beautiful. They do this cover of they just play DJs. It's fucking great. Everybody's locked in. Sure, the chemistry was phenomenal when it was, just Eric, Bud, and Brad, the core that is Sublime. When we think of the core band, the band itself, yes, those are the dudes. But Sublime was bigger than that, man. It was bigger than that. And it included Miguel. There are contracts. If you find them online, there are documents. Maybe we'll pull it up. Maybe we'll pull it up sometime for another show. There are documents that stipulate that when Elephant Levitation, that was his producing name, when they're in the studio, Miguel is a 4th member of Sublime, but when they're live, they're a 3-piece. I never understood that. I never understood why that happened. At some point, Miguel goes from being the second guitar player to just managing the band and engineering and just being like, he's kind of like almost like a Memphis Mafia type guy, like Z-Man, like maybe a little bit above Z-Man's grade. Like Z-Man was kind of like the Memphis Mafia, Elvis had like the entourage, the guys that, whatever. That was like Z-Man. And then you had like Miguel was more integral in the operation, because, he was there for everything. He was booking the band and managing the band, but he was also in the studio, doing stuff. It's my understanding, maybe Reed will know this in the comments one more time, Reed. Okay. It's my understanding that there are whole versions of takes from 40 Ounce to Freedom where Miguel is actually singing lead on certain songs. I'm not talking about Scarlet Begonias. I'm talking about like other songs where they, again, Miguel was more involved from a band standpoint, in addition to producing and engineering the project. And he was singing lead on stuff, so this idea of having like Miguel as like this integral part. If you go listen to Mexican live shit, I think it's called, it's when they like went down to like the Baja coast or whatever, and they're just playing like on a beachfront. And that's another video that has Miguel, and that's like really sloppy, loose jams. But even still, with Miguel there on second guitar, it just fills out. He just fills it out, man. He just fills it out. The problem with some of this information that I remember when I used to do deep dives on Sublime, that's a problem with the internet. A lot of it's gone. So that thing that I just said about 40 Ounce to Freedom with, alternate takes with Miguel singing lead, I remember reading that somewhere. I have no idea where I read it. Totally not be true. I just remember that. The point being is that Miguel was this super integral piece in this documentary. He comes on only a couple of times. His role is so incredibly diminished, and it's egregiously disrespectful, in my opinion, to Miguel. I really, really, really feel like the dude the dude could have narrated the fucking documentary, because here's the thing about Eric. Eric doesn't really, I don't know, man. Eric seems to be a man of few words. He doesn't really say too much in the doc either. The person who speaks the most of everybody who is like really there is Bud. Bud seems to be, driving everything. And the truth of the matter is, dude, like, yes, Bud was there for the whole duration, but like, Bud didn't even drum or write on most of the 40 Ounce of Freedom songs. I just want to say I'm not diminishing Bud in any way, shape, or form. I mean, he's like a cornerstone of Sublime. The point being that like it feels like there are so many other players that were so integral to that era that are just sort of pushed aside in this documentary. That's how it feels while watching it. You know what I mean? It's a bummer. It's a fucking bummer. Miguel is diminished to like being a hustler who played a couple of live shows with us, instead of being like literally the fourth leg of the table. That kind of blew my mind. And again, Marshall Goodman, if you look at the credits of this documentary, I went to the credits as I was watching the credits roll. Do you know how many songs Marshall Goodman is credited as co-written with Brad? Marshall co-wrote all the songs that Bud doesn't play on 40 Ounces of Freedom. Marshall pretty much writes on all those songs. Not every single one of them, but most of them. Okay? So like, I mean, again, I would say that's a pretty integral piece of the recording legacy of Sublime. So it's like Sublime was so much more. And then really when you look at like the way that they talk about Robin the Hood and what we know from Robin the Hood, and there's a lot of stuff that's kind of implied. I will say I did appreciate they did kind of imply like a lot of stuff without saying it. And I can understand. Look, this movie is being made in the cooperation of Jim Nowell and Troy and Bud and Eric. So on some level, politics come into play. And this is what I was referring to at the beginning, the cutoff beginning when we were talking about the documentaries and how documentaries work and documentary agendas work. When you're making a documentary that's in cooperation with the subject themselves, there are stipulations and politics that come into play. And that's goes back to what I was saying about Bud. Again, no disrespect to Bud, like really. And again, I don't want to make it sound like his role is diminished in any way. I mean, he was a fucking 1/3 of Sublime, okay? Like straight up. But I get the sense it feels like people are flexing and throwing their weight around with the cut of this movie. Now, did the directors have final cut on this movie? I don't know. It's very possible that they did not. And people who were either in the band or related to the band ended up having more of a say in who gets the final cut. The rule of thumb with what Bud played on 40 Ounces of Freedom, anything that's on Gaugh Won't Pay the Bills is Bud, because Gaugh Won't Pay the Bills gets folded into 40 Ounces of Freedom. Basically, 40 Ounces of Freedom is an expansion of Gaugh Won't Pay the Bills. They just kept adding and adding and adding songs, and all the songs that they added feature Marshall Goodman on them. Let me go to the comments real quick before we continue. Bert was his best friend. Yeah, we saw it. DJ Product, aka Doug Boyce, old DJ for Head PE, was really close friends with Bradley too. Doug laid some scratches on Robin the Hood. He's in Stories Tales. I think that dude is also in this documentary because they talk about him bringing his turntables to the crack house, the secret tweaker pad where Brad recorded all the stuff that wasn't from the demo tape for Epitaph. In fact, they had fucking Mr. Brett from Bad Religion is in the doc. I mean, that was a great get. They have lots of great players, but there are so many gross omissions. But this guy having this DJ they didn't say that he was the guy from Head PE though. So I don't know if it was him or not, but one thing that I really loved about the documentary, I could talk for hours about Robin the Hood, literally for hours about it. Robin the Hood is like a glorified mixtape. They took 7 or 8 songs that they had done in a studio that were technically supposed to be demos for a potential recording contract that they might have had with Epitaph, and that never went down. I got to tell you, if they had signed with them, that would have been pretty solid too. That would have been a real interesting sort of thing to happen. They probably would have been on all those Punkorama compilations, who knows? Maybe Brad would still be alive if they had, I don't know. That's a crazy, how would changing record labels change that? I don't know. That's crazy. But the thing, shit, I got lost. Oh yeah. They show a sketch of the layout of the secret tweaker pad, dude. And it was so fucking rad to hear them talk about. So like, that's the thing. they sort of stop off at various points in the history, but they're just not detailed enough. And again, it's not like you can throw the kitchen sink into anything that's 93 minutes long, but it just felt like there was so much. I was so thirsty as a Sublime fan to learn about this time in the band that, like, and it seems like Robin the Hood was like this weird. That's when Brad was at his worst with the drugs, like really, really bad, obviously, before he killed himself. Oh, damn it. You're not supposed to say that on YouTube. Before that happened, the other thing too is, man, they really, in almost everything about Sublime, nobody really ever mentions the fact that, like, Brad was smoking crack too. He's not skinny from the heroin as much as he's skinny from the speed and the crack and the meth and whatever else that they're up to. That's when he's like really skinny and so close to death. But he's also, like, they describe in the doc, like, how he was like a mad scientist in the secret tweaker pad, putting this together. Robin the Hood is an incredible it's an incredible piece of work. It really, really is. But it's not as cohesive. It's not a cohesive album the way 40 Ounce to Freedom was, or the self-titled album was. It feels more like a hodgepodge. Reed says Kelly Vargas also jumped out of the crowd and played at the LB Chili Cook-Off in 95 when Bud was late and didn't show up. Was that when he busted his ribs skateboarding or something? So even then, Kelly always came in the clutch. By the way, another thing that was not mentioned in the doc that I really wish was, they didn't talk about Raleigh Theodore Sakers. And for those of you who don't know, it's actually Kelly's brother, Matt Vargas, who taped Raleigh, or he had gotten a hold of the tape. I don't know if he was the one who worked in the place, or if he had gotten a hold of the tape and brought it to the guys. But that's the origin of the Raleigh Theodore Sakers stuff. Reed says, yep, Miguel played guitar and filled out the sound with Brad from 91 to 93, and even played from the soundboard sometimes. I didn't know that. What? Okay, when was he playing from the soundboard? Was that after 93? Can see him at the Fiji Islander Santa Barbara show singing Pan Bread. Whoa, that a week before Brad died. So, right, yes, that was when they're on that string of shows after they got married. They're trying out self-titled songs, and I guess he was still doing stuff as late as then. Miguel played most of the solos on the album anyway. For example, We're Only Gonna Die on 40 Ounce is solo. He did the Santeria solo, What I Got solo, All Miguel, and more. Much more of a technical player than Brad. That is in direct conflict of what Bud says with Paul Leary when they're talking about Santeria for Rolling Stone. See, again, it's like, it just goes to show that people like to, history gets rewritten by, by people. That happens. Mike used to book the band using a zine called Book Your Own Fucking Life that listed the venues, DIYs, dive bars, and their phone numbers before email. I'm sure that exists. He even rapped on the original version of Get Out. Yes. Okay. So before Get Out was on the Secondhand Smoke, the remix version. The original version on the early versions of 40 Ounce to Freedom had Get Out as the second track after Waiting for My Ruka. And yes, there's a whole rap verse that was cut out because underneath it, that was the Lemon song by Led Zeppelin, and they threatened to sue Sublime. So they had to cut it out and remix that track. But that is that's Miguel, man. Spanky says, Bud only played 2 songs on 40 Ounce of Freedom live at Ease and Badfish. That is not true. Bud plays on anything that's on Jaw Won't Pay the Bills. If it's on Jaw Won't Pay the Bills, that's Bud. Yeah, he busted his ribs later on the Warped Tour. Summer Chili Cook-Off was in April. Oh, I did not know that. The full band songs on Robin the Hood were recorded at West Beach Recorders, which is the Epitaph studio. Right. Exactly. Now, those were demos that they had gotten. They got to record there for free. Those were demos. And, Brett, from Epitaph and Bad Religion ultimately passed because he had heard how drugged out they were and, you know, was sober. At least that's what he claims. Favorite Sublime song. I don't know, Jody Ramona. I mean, I love them all. Yeah, see, Spanky Bravo is agreeing with me, saying that Brad played the Santeria solo. That's what I had thought as well. But then they were re-recorded by Marshall with Miguel. Maybe that's what happened. I don't know. Who knows? In any case, where were we? Where were we in before we got through all those comments? I was just in the middle of going on and on. You know, it's sticky when you start talking about. It's sticky when you go off on tangent and then you try to wrap back around to what you were talking about. So I think it's a good time to mention that the official sponsor for the Frumess channel is riotstickers.com. If you need stickers to be printed, go to riotstickers.com. We have a special deal with them. The proud sponsor here at the Frumess channel. You can get 1,000 stickers. That's right. You heard me correct. 1,000 stickers for $79 when you use the deal down in the description below. That's riotstickers.com/Frumess, FRUMESS. Go there. That's the only place that you can get this deal for that cheap. You are not going to find a cheaper deal than $79 for 1,000 stickers. These stickers, let me tell you something about these stickers. These stickers are printed on vinyl, makes them waterproof, and they have a UV coating, which protects them very well from the sun. You're not going to find a better deal. They do everything, man. They printed this banner. See that banner over there? They print buttons, t-shirts, everything. Why am I talking? Let me just let the song do the talking for me, and then we'll be right back with more of our review about the Sublime documentary.
Posters and promo cards, there's nothing we can't print for you. From stage backdrops to bass drum heads, we can print on shirts, we can print on hats, we can print on pants. Cheap prices and high quality, quick turnaround times and free shipping. We also offer free artwork support, great customer service, and so much more. We are the bomb. Riotstickers.com. Riot Stickers, we are the bomb. Riotstickers.com. Riot Stickers, we are the bomb. Riotstickers.com. Riot Stickers, we are the bomb.
All right, and we are back. We are talking about Sublime, the documentary, and all things Sublime in Periphery and whatnot. And just to give you a quick sidebar, if you are going to jump over to the Danzig Misfits Sam Hain side of things, if you like all of the Danzig interview stuff I do, the third part of the John Christ interview that I've been doing with LA Guns guitarist Ace Von Johnson is available now for early premiere. If you're a YouTube member or a Patreon, check out my whole Patreon archive. Got tons of videos that you're not going to find here on the channel. We are closing in on 2,000 videos on the channel proper. Actually, it's like probably 1,500 that are public, and there are hundreds of videos that are in the archive that you cannot see. So wade through the pools. You know, pop your head in. They're feature-length films, all sorts of stuff that you can find there in the Patreon. You can see my second feature-length film in there, Gaugh, although it's the inferior version, but that's coming to Blu-ray very soon anyway. So whatever. In any case, let us continue. Let's go to some of these comments before we move on. Reed says Brad probably did play the Santeria solo, but a lot of the shit was Miguel. There you go. Yes, Aaron, Riot Stickers are the bomb. So Reed, yes, that is the singer of Less Than Jake doing the theme song for Riot Stickers. That is absolutely the singer from Less Than Jake. And I guess he knows Sharpie Riot, who is the sponsor of this channel. What is the doc called? I've never even heard it. It's called Sublime, It came out in, well, it premiered in 2019 and it is since not available. Yeah, Spanky, yeah, I was blown away when I first saw that about the drums on 40 Ounces of Freedom. So it's like, Marshall Goodman is a huge part of the, when you think about the fact that he drummed on a huge majority of their studio recordings, like a whole ton of them. It really sort of like reclarifies some things. So again, yeah, it was, that's the thing. The problem with this documentary and the story is so vast. It needs a miniseries, man. Like I said, the first episode would be just the beginnings. It would go up to 40 Ounces of Freedom. Second episode would be 40 Ounces of Freedom. Brad gets into drugs. Miguel's in the band and out of the band, whatever. The third episode would be Bradley nearing death from drugs, as well as the recording of Robin the Hood. And eventually that would end with getting signed by Gasoline Alley and MCA. And then the fourth episode would be Warped Tour, kind of getting sober for a little bit, the birth of Jacob, the recording of Self-Titled, and it would end with Bradley's death. And then the fifth part of the miniseries would be everything, the whole aftermath, everything. Long Beach Dub All Stars, the album blowing up, Sublime with Rome as like an afternote, like all that stuff should come after, man. Again, you could do 90 minutes on the after Bradley dies alone. You could, like, that's how much there is to tell, I don't know, man. It just, for it to end where it ends in this thing is just a real sort of downer. It doesn't work. It doesn't friggin' work. It doesn't click. It was very interesting they had a member who was a childhood friend who was in the band Sloppy Seconds, and the name Sloppy Seconds, I didn't realize this is what they say in the doc. The name Sloppy Seconds was really supposed to be sort of a tip of the hat to the fact that they were really they were doing in Sloppy Seconds kind of like what they were doing in Sublime, incorporating a lot of different, influences and things. So the idea of Sloppy Seconds we are coming in and doing, putting all this stuff together in a pot. And so it was cool to hear from that guy. He was the singer of that band. And so like they got some interesting people, but again, glaring omissions. Where is Kelly Vargas? Where are the Ziggins? We had Paul Leary was there. Now here's what's interesting. Here's kind of a little bit of a smoking gun. You can see where the Slightly Stupid guys. Where are the two bros from Slightly Stupid? Like they were there for a little bit. They should have had some screen time. This was produced. The main producer was Dave Kaplan, who was a co-manager of Sublime with John Phillips. John Phillips was kind of like the main, manager as far as I knew. And John Phillips's uncle ran MCA, that's how he had an ear. They told this story. I didn't realize this. Sublime was almost signed to Atlantic Records, and Brad went in with his contract back to MCA after he had stuck these stickers on the BMW, and basically like finagled them to sign, and so that he could get a bigger advance or get more of an advance. Here's what's really upsetting, though. I think they do a great disservice by sort of, they're trying their best to make it more about I know I read a couple other things. They wanted to tell a story that wasn't so focused on death and wasn't so focused on the tragedy, and that it was more about the band itself. But they didn't even really do that because they glazed over so much of the history. Like, if you're going to have 90 minutes, and I felt like the pacing was going along pretty well, and then they started to hyper focus on these like little things that we already kind of had heard. Like, they're hyper focusing on, instead of focusing on the history, they're hyper focusing on the particular recording of certain songs. And I'm kind of going, there's so much for you to be talking about right now. Why are you focusing on What I Got? We all know, the thing about What I Got. They had Half Pint. That was cool. They had Half Pint in there as well. I would have liked to seen some interviews with HR or some of the guys from the Bad Brains. That would have been rad. HR had Sublime as their backing band when he put out his solo album called Charge, which is a really great solo record. And in fact, Sublime covers Shame in the Game, which is an HR song. But they were the backing band when HR needed a backing band. And there's, I guess there's tons of recordings. There's a whole bunch of live recordings of them backing HR. Pretty fucking cool. Again, all sort of like so much stuff glossed over, particularly the drugs. The drugs are alluded to, but they're so far in the background. And the problem with the story of Sublime is because the band ended that the way that they did, drugs need to unfortunately be a part of the story. They don't just need to be a part of the story. They need to kind of be a focal point of the story. They are the antagonist of the story. It's like there are these two competing factors, the drug use and, unbridled creativity compounded with entrepreneurial spirit, DIY, punk rock, grassroots touring. The thing about Sublime is it's like they're not industry plants. Everything that they did, they earned themselves. They did it by just being really good and going out there and selling their cassettes out of their car. I mean, their independent operation, the money that they were making from selling 40 Ounce of Freedom, it's insane what they were doing. Miguel says at one point, we had ordered something along the lines of they had ordered 20,000 orders for Sublime 40 Ounce of Freedom, and or had pre-sold, but they had pre-sold, but they didn't even have the money to something like they didn't have the money to like repress or something. They were in such demand. I mean, you have to think about that for a minute. 20,000 units independently. Here's the thing, back in the day, to really be a success, you had to sell millions of records. Selling thousands of records would be, good. But what really set you apart from everybody else was that you had to cross over the million unit mark. Okay. In today, if someone were to sell 100,000 units, it would be mind-boggling because everything's changed. But back then, the idea of selling 20,000 copies, 30,000, 40,000 copies of your independently recorded album out of the trunk of your car when you don't have major label support is unfucking paralleled. Okay? It's unbelievable. It's mind-boggling to consider what they were able to do. This whole aspect of what they did completely glossed over apart from this one soundbite. I'm just so like kind of disillusioned that like that they glossed over so many of these things. And again, from a storytelling filmmaker standpoint, with the powers that be are like, hey, deliver us a 90-minute doc, and you got to make cuts. And so when you consider, does this story tell the story of Sublime in 90 minutes? I would say yes, it does. And it does a good job of it. Okay. That's the truth. Even with all of the glaring omissions that I'm talking about as a diehard fan, the truth of the matter is they do a great job pacing wise, hitting all the pieces to get to that the end of the first half of the story that I was talking about when Brad dies. But like I said, for the story to really be do it justice, you need to talk about the drugs, and you need to talk about it in detail. The reason why Bud left the band the first time is because he was on heroin. He was on heroin. He went to a rehab, and it was like a Christian rehab, and there were like Christian bikers. He talks about it in Stories, Tells, Lies, and Exaggerations, something a little bit about it. He alludes to it. And what happened was he left. He was like out of the band. And the way that he tells the story in Sublime 2019, it's so disingenuous to me. And maybe it was more detailed. Maybe it was edited that way to make it more glossed over, because again, the family is like, hey, we don't want this to be all about drugs. So they did their best to kind of gloss over it. Fair enough if that's the case. But a part of me just feels like, how are you going to glom over that? Because that's what leads to Marshall coming into the band. It's so important. And then later, they completely gloss over the detail. There's a couple of glaring details with the drugs that they gloss over. One is that, they're sort of wishy-washy. If you read the book Crazy Fool, which is why I feel the way that I feel so much, because I feel like Crazy Fool might be it's really troubling to read. It's a troubling read. It's really sad. It's really like a disastrous like read, in the sense like it'll gut you. Like, it's really sad. It's a harrowing tale of drug addiction is what it is. A band that's literally going to be pulled down by drug addiction. But there are details that are integral to the story of Sublime. And one of those details is the fact that fucking Bud, not only was he there in the room with Brad, but he fucking tied off with him, man. That he tied off with him. They got high together. But Bud did heroin with Brad when he died. And I feel like it's almost like it's a confusing detail, because you're kind of like, it doesn't fit with the narrative. The narrative is, we wanted him to be off drugs so that way we could, be the best band that we could be. But the reality is life is fucking complicated. People are complicated. People do conflicting things. The idea that Bud knew that Brad had such a fucking drug problem, but yet like got high with him anyway, because he used to be a fucking heroin addict too. It's like, it's fucking heavy. It's hard. How do you tell that in a documentary? So I guess when I think about that out loud, like as I'm thinking about it, I guess it makes sense. Like, hey, this is too complicated for us to like fit into 90 minutes, but it's also doing a disservice to the story, man. And the truth was that, they talk about that suitcase as kind of like of legend, the suitcase, the drug suitcase that Brad got a peek or something, or was offered drugs out of that suitcase, and he held on to them. They held on to those drugs, and the next night he didn't do them, or maybe he did a little bit of them, and he wanted to tie off one last time. And the thing was that he had been sober for a little bit off of heroin, and the stuff that he had was not the typical heroin that he was used to, and he took too much and he died. It's a common story. It's a common story that's only been made more common with the, advent of fentanyl, really. So I think it's kind of crazy to gloss over that. I feel like that is, it's an important detail. One thing that I do want to point out that I thought was really great that they added, that they added to the friggin' doc, was the fact that, and this is something that they talk about in Crazy Fool as well. Eric lost a friend prior to Brad. Eric lost another friend to heroin overdose. He had been fully traumatized by drug addiction and drug overdose in the past. And now he was watching Brad go down that same path. And what I didn't know until I was watching this documentary is that Eric tried to intervene in 95 at some point. He tried to intervene like maybe late 95 or something, when Brad was really bad. During the recording, I guess, of the self-titled record, is like Eric and Brad were not talking. Brad wouldn't talk to Eric. They had a falling out, and so that's something that I didn't know at all. So like, it's interesting how like, how that knowing that like sort of really colors my understanding of the history in the band. So it's interesting how like they would include that detail, but they don't include the fact that Bud was the one fucking getting high with him the last time. You know, I've heard Bud tell that story a few times and, in interviews and stuff. And I feel like the last time, again, assuming that they used all of it and maybe there was a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor. I feel like it was not truthful. It was not full. I'm not saying that Bud was not being truthful. I'm saying that the edit was not truthful to the story. And, you know, Opie had Opie has one of the best moments in the whole doc, if you ask me. He really sort of breaks down at the end, like talking about Brad, and he like talking about how like, Brad should be a reminder to not do heroin and not glorify drug use and this, that, and the other. And I feel like that right there, like that's like the crux of the message, but it's only powerful. It's only has the proper impact when you like hear the whole complicated story, because that's the thing about Bradley Nowell. When I was younger, I used to like really idolize this guy, not for the drug use, but like, I don't know how to put this. Like, when someone dies, it sort of canonizes them as like a saint. Look at John Lennon, look at any of them, Jim Morrison. They become like legendary, they become these like mythological figures that are almost like infallible. But the reality is that they were fucking human. Like, and Brad Nowell was kind of like a contradiction in so many ways. He was the super, he came from a well-off family, family of divorce, but they well-off, lots of opportunity, this, that, and the other, and sort of like almost like wanted to dive into the gutter. And here's what I mean when I say the gutter. It's almost like he wanted to live this different kind of life, a more bohemian life than what he came from. That's really what I'm trying to say. That's what it really is, like a bohemian life. And part of bohemian life is drug use. When I think a lot about Sublime songs and like the subject matter, who I'm honestly reminded of? Another thing that both Sublime and the Misfits have in common. I'm reminded of Charles Bukowski. If anybody's familiar with Charles Bukowski and his poetry, he was like known as this gutter poet. And, in the documentary, this was something I was not aware of, that Brad was like super into William Burroughs. He was a beat poet who was doing heroin until he was 80 years old. He's revered by all the punk rockers from New York City. Everybody wanted to do heroin with William Burroughs. It was like a rite of passage to do heroin with him. He was, this guy, he was like I said, he was a writer, who killed his wife doing the William Tell trick. And then he moved down to Mexico. He like tried to shoot an apple off her head, and he ended up blowing her away. And was a habitual, really, was a drug user till the day he died, heroin addict till the day he died. And like, these are the people that like Brad, as they say in the doc, that he worshiped. But I also get the sense, like, when you look at lyrically what Brad is writing about, like, there's so much Bukowski in it. He's writing about like, he's writing about like, what's it called? Like, like seedy life. You know what I mean? Look at a song like Mary or Pool Shark or Freeway Time in County Jail, or, just any of those songs, man. Even April 29th, 1992. He's writing about like, he's just writing about like the ugly side of life. Not ugly. I don't know if ugly is the right word. He's trying to write about this thing, this thing that all writers kind of write about. And he pulled drugs into the mix. It's almost like, it's like he purposely sought out to do heroin, from my understanding. They always call it like he was doing like the heroin experiment. It's like he sought this shit out. It's just so interesting to me. so it's interesting how people like, Brad, now that he's dead and gone, he can do no wrong in anybody's eyes. But like the reality was he was a human being who who did a lot of sort of, like for instance, there was a story, I don't know if this was on Reddit or whatever. There was a story about how during those riots, April 29th, 1992, Brad was Brad was out there rioting, and that there were these people who were guarding their business on the roof, and Brad and some other people were like waiting for them to leave so that they could like go and like, you know, rob the place or something. Again, this is an anecdotal story, so I don't know if there's any truth to that, but I just find it so interesting that like, you know, how he comes from like this rich sort of family life, and has all these opportunities, but yet like it's like he's purposely trying to just lead this different life. I don't know if that makes any sense. But yeah, so it's like drugs are such an integral part to the Sublime story, and they're not thoroughly represented in the way that they needed to be. I mean, sure, they're mentioned. They're mentioned plenty. They're not. It's not like they're not mentioned. But I mean, the story the story of Sublime is a story of drug use. That's the reality. For as much as people love the music, and again, it's awesome that they focused on the positive stuff, and I'm glad that they did. But like, it didn't tackle all of it, and that's what if you're going to call your documentary a definitive documentary, like that's super fucking important to do. It's super important that you mention that Bud did heroin with Brad the night he died. It's super important that you mention that Eric had a friend who died of a drug overdose. Like all of that stuff. I wish they had kind of looked more at Crazy Fool, the book. Like I really do. In 94, when Brad was at his worst, Jim and Janie was Brad's stepmom. They were getting ready they were bracing for his death, man. They had already kind of accepted, at least according to the book, they had accepted that Brad was going to die as early as 94. This is before he had, had a kid with Troy, I mean, like he was on the way out. He was bad. They briefly allude to it. Kelly talks about how Brad was locked out of the house. He wasn't allowed in the house. I mean, the stories in Crazy Fool are harrowing. And again, so when I watch this sort of when I'm watching Sublime 2019, I feel like I'm getting a very sanitized, squeaky clean version of the truth. And the problem with the documentary is it's not supposed to be fiction. It's supposed to be reality. And so if you're going to tell me a true story, then tell the true story, especially when it's a parable. And in this case, it's a parable is don't do drugs because they will kill you. That's what makes the story so interesting. That's what elevates the Sublime story and makes the story to be told. Now they're doing the biopic. To talk about the biopic for a minute. And I don't know who's behind the biopic, and I'm a little, apprehensive about it because, it's really hard to do biopics. It's really hard to do biopics about musicians. It's easier to do biopics about historical figures. You know why? Because they're not people that we see in movie posters or on TV all the time, whose faces we're not as familiar with. In fact, there are some biopics, the people we never even know what they looked like in real life. So when we see somebody portraying them, it's easier for us to suspend our disbelief. When you have why have they never done a biopic on the Beatles? It would be literally impossible. You know why? Because you're going to look at John Lennon and go, that's not John Lennon. Like they have done stuff. They've done Nowhere Boy and Backbeat or whatever. They've done some stuff, but like you can never definitively do a biopics about musicians. It's just really hard. I think Val Kilmer was able to do it pretty well as Jim Morrison. There are exceptions, but generally it's really hard. I don't know how the fuck they're going to do Brad Nowell. I don't know how they're going to do these guys. That CBGB's movie was, I mean, that was tough. Taylor Hawkins is Iggy Pop. Iggy Pop is Iggy Pop, motherfucker. How are you going to try and convince me that Taylor Hawkins is Iggy Pop? Unless it's supposed to be kind of like a goof. Joey Ramone is Joey Ramone. You know, what's that guy? The comedian. He's going to play Joey Ramone. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. You can't. It's impossible. It's, you know, Tina Turner. That was a pretty good exception. That was a pretty good exception when Angela Bassett did Tina Turner. That worked. It's generally really hard. Now, one of the best biopics out there, it's not really a biopic, it's more true crime. Has anybody ever seen Lords of Chaos? That's directed by the guy who did Bathory. He was the drummer from Bathory, the Norwegian black metal band. That guy is the guy I want to do the Sublime biopic. He's actually doing a biopic about Gigi Allen, which I am very interested in seeing. We were talking about Gigi Allen a few weeks ago on the channel. I want to see that dude. I want to see that dude do the Sublime biopic. I think and you know what? That's something that you call it stories, tales, lies, and exaggerations, right? Because that's essentially the title card after Lords of Chaos. It's like there's like a thing it says like, this is a story of truth, lies, and everything that really happened. Something like that. And I feel like that's the only way that you're going to like properly dramatize the Sublime story. Pete Davidson. Thank you, Spanky. Pete Davidson. He's not going to be fucking Joey Ramone. Yes, I agree. The 94 to 96 DVD is pretty rad. Angus says, when I lived in Lawrence, Kansas, being a cashier at a newsstand, I would communicate with Burroughs briefly monthly while purchasing cigarettes and Guns and Ammo magazine. I didn't know he lived in Lawrence, Kansas. Wait, you would see him, or this was like by letters, like written correspondence. Dan says, I lived in Long Beach back in 83, 84. I like to think I ran into Brad at some point. Him and Snoop, haha. I lived on La Jara Street. You know, Dan, I don't know if you were here when we did the other episode, but like, isn't it interesting that like the Misfits and Sublime are kind of like these two cult bands, like Lodi on the East Coast and Long Beach on the West Coast? They kind of have like a similar, like, you know, mythology and cult status surrounding them. It's very, very interesting. Crazy White Boy is a big Burroughs fan, by the way, and he knows Charles. That's a spendy book these days. I'm guessing you're talking about Crazy Fool. Hold on, I'm just going back up here in the comments. Reed says, yes, Spanky Bravo. That was the first I had heard of them re-recording Bud's tracks with Marshall. I didn't know that what else did they re-record with? Wait a minute. What did they re-record? Hold on a second. Wait, what? I thought anything that is Jah Won't Pay the Bills is Bud, and anything that is anything else is Marshall Goodman. Yeah, I misunderstood something Marshall said in an interview. I have to go back and listen to it. Anti-flag with Rome. Reed says Marshall's sister Ruth Goodman, R.I.P., was in right. She played saxophone in Sloppy Seconds, and that's how Marshall met Brad at a party when he was DJing and spinning Rockberry Jam by LA Dream Team. Blaine Kaplan was the co-manager. Okay, I stand corrected. Thank you, Reed. Blaine Kaplan was the co-manager. Dave Kaplan was the Surf Dog Records down in San Diego and completely unrelated to Blaine. Thank you for clarifying that. I did not, I misunderstood that. I thought he was, because it says in the documentary, it says that Dave Kaplan was the co-manager of Sublime. That's what it actually says. 322 Dan says, I think I heard Fat Mike owns the white tour van. I think I saw a video of it at Mike's house. The stories that van holds. Oh yeah. If those walls could talk. Spanky says, after all this time, the fans have waited for a definitive, well-made Sublime doc. It's a bummer that they left out so many crucial people and details. Listen, Spanky, I think that anybody who has seen this doc or watches this doc and is either a casual Sublime fan or just wants a general overview with some interesting tidbits, we'll be plenty satisfied. But for me, for us who know the bigger picture story, it's an injustice, man. It's an injustice that it ends with Brad dying. That story needs to go on for needs to cover all of 1997, man. The story needs to end with the smashing success and them ultimately deciding they can't be a band anymore. And they completely don't even acknowledge. They don't even talk about the decision to not be Sublime anymore. Like, it's crazy to me. Reed says the van is owned by a man named Peter Sanders out of the San Francisco Bay Area. He was storing it with Fat Mike for a bit. He was going to put it at the Punk Rock Museum, but it didn't work out. That's exactly where that van belongs, at the Punk Rock Museum, in my opinion. That makes sense. Mike pointed it out. Never said he owned it. I think it was on eBay. I remember when it was on eBay, and it was like over 10 G's to buy it. And if I had the dough, I would. Yeah. Hold on, I'm going back down into the comments again. Crazy Fool cost me a pretty penny. I have a digital scan of it. Somebody, I was able to get a hold of it. Angus says, I saw Burroughs in person. He moved out of New York to Lawrence because his personal secretary, James Grauerholtz, just moved there. A move for both to get away from the drugs. Interesting. Very, very interesting. So even there, he was trying. They should put it back into print. There's a reason why it's not in print anymore. Because again, there's a lot of information there. There's a lot of information there that gets completely omitted. In fact, maybe that's our next deep dive. Okay. Maybe that's what we need to do. We need to deep dive that book. We'll read the book on the air. That's what we're going to do. That's exactly what we're going to do. So if you are down with the band that they call Sublime, you will appreciate when we do a read through of Crazy Fool. That's what we're going to do. Like just the way we do with the Misfits stuff, we're going to do that as well. Before we get out of here, I just want to make sure I'm plenty thorough. If there's any little, I didn't take notes when I was watching this thing. The movie is fresh in my mind, and I'm just trying to glaze over anything interesting. Oh, one thing that was not discussed but kind of alluded to a little bit was Gwen talking about her crush on Brad. And it's my understanding, and again, I don't know the details, I just remember this from old forums that don't exist anymore. It's my understanding that Brad and Gwen hooked up more than once. I don't know if it was post Tony or pre Tony. Gwen was in a relationship with Tony Kanal for most of No Doubt, and they were dating for most of No Doubt, and then they had a breakup, and I don't know. I think they had a hook. I think they hooked up. Brad and Gwen hooked up after that. I don't know where Troy falls into this. I don't know if it was before Brad started seeing Troy or if it was after, but there was some stuff. There was something was going on. And so it's my understanding that Gwen and Brad had an actual thing. And Gwen basically in the doc, she talks about how she had this sort of crush on him, but it wasn't sort of like a romantic crush per se. That was another interesting thing too. I didn't know that Troy had a boyfriend. Troy had a boyfriend when she first met Brad, and she talks about their relationship. That's something that never really got fleshed out. That actually got fleshed out a little bit in the doc. So, there is some stuff that is discovered or discussed in the doc. It's not like a total cookie cutter, thing, but it is squeaky clean. Like a lot of stuff, even the way Bud, I don't know. I got to be honest. Bud's interview reminded me of later Paul McCartney interviews, where he's just very much going through the motions of telling these paint by number stories that he's told so many times that he just had he knows it's he repeats what he says verbatim. It just, I don't know, kind of bums me out. Whizbang says, I was in line with you at the Prudential Center this summer. Okay. Yeah, right. When at the Misfit show, you should have said hello, man. You should have said hello. If you ever see me out in the world, always come and say hello. I'm a very friendly guy, as you could tell. Very extroverted. Oh, you're just now realizing it. Okay, that makes sense. Dan says, I'll post my live recording of the Long Beach Dub All-Stars at First Ave at Minneapolis, Minnesota, January of 2000. Please do, Dan. Send it to Reed. It sounds like that's something that he wanted or wants to. One of these days, if anyone cares, tape runs out 2 songs from the end. Yeah, you should definitely do it. I think people. So, but that is the one cool thing about Sublime. It seems like they're one of those bands, like they don't really care what's out there. There are some bands that, as we know, there's some bands that get very upset if you put anything online live, but like there are other bands that are like super okay with like just having stuff out there. So Sublime seems to be one of those bands you can kind of just put stuff out there. Who knows? Maybe we should do our own like more definitive Sublime retrospective. Like there's plenty of fucking material out there. It's just it's crazy. Reed says Ross One's guitar player is the main LBDS Long Beach Dub All-Stars archivist, and he would love to connect with you. How can I reach out? Yay! I love when this stuff happens. You guys connect, do it through emails or whatever. Listen, if you have trouble connecting, you can connect through me. Send an email to FrumessMAIL@gmail.com with the email address, and I'll pass it along. I'm in touch with Reed, so I could pass it along to him, Dan, if you want, vice versa. Whizbang says, I got introduced to your channel right before seeing Danzig sing Elvis at Montalban. Oh, that's cool. We love Danzig sings Elvis. What else can I say? What can I hope for in the future? I don't know. I don't know what this biopic is going to be. Sublime with Rome doesn't have any actual Sublime members in it anymore. What we really need now is a mini series that covers everything, all 5, 5 segments. And here's the thing. The people that could do a mini series would need to have access to all the people, but like they're all out there, dude. The Ziggins are out there. Like everybody's out there. Just fucking contact them. Make it happen. Do another documentary. See, you know what the part of the problem was? This was too close to Sublime. I feel like you need someone that's not connected with the band to make the documentary. It needs to be a completely unbiased look, a scathing look, a scathing portrait of the truth of the whole band. In fact, even more so than a documentary, I think I would be just as happy with a fucking really in-depth book, like an oral history, like a really, really, really in-depth history about Sublime, that really just sort of goes through. That's really how you would do it. I don't think maybe you could tell it in it. Maybe you can't tell it in a documentary. Maybe instead what you have to do is you actually have to tell it in book form and just do chapters. Like I want to know everything there is to know about Robin the Hood. And again, of all the things that they covered that were kind of unknown to me, the Robin the Hood stuff was that was the shit. I didn't say this before because I got carried away in what I was saying. There was a sketch. Someone did a sketch of the secret tweaker pad and the couch where Brad lived in this flop house with a bunch of drug addicts in it was like a storefront building. And like to see, like he just had a bunch of recording equipment and like to see the whole setup. And then they would like cut, like the director, Bill, did a great job of using some, footage that was out there to sort of really paint a picture along with this sort of sketch up of what that place looked like. It really painted a picture well. I was very pleased with that. That was cool. Whizbang said, Danzig Sings Elvis was my introduction to all of Glenn's work. Before hearing that, I'd never listened to any of his bands. I also got to meet Glenn this tour. Whizbang, you're kind of blowing my mind right now. You are like legit blowing my mind right now with saying that. I mean, it's cool. Like, it's not bad. Like, it's an amazing thing. Like, it just blows my mind that Danzig sings Elvis. You know, everybody's first exposure to something is something. You know, my first exposure to Sublime was the self-titled record, right? I don't think. Maybe it was 40 Ounce to Freedom. No, it was 40 Ounce to Freedom, actually. I guess there are some people, their first exposure to fucking Danzig is fucking Danzig sings Elvis. That's crazy. Dan's looking forward to the Crazy Fool reading. Okay, Dan. It's a done deal. We're gonna do it. We're gonna read Crazy Fool on here. That's what we're gonna do. We've done other stuff, right? We might as well do Crazy Fool. I'm also reading the Mad Max novelization for anybody who cares. That's on here. We did the Return of Living Dead novelization too. That's on here as well. I got a bunch of stuff. You know what's interesting though? You know, I've seen some interviews with Eric recently, Eric Wilson, and he seems very out of it. Like, if you know what I mean, he seems very out of it. In the doc, he seems very like sober. You know, even though he doesn't have a lot to say, it feels like he's very clear-minded when he's speaking. So that was interesting. That's interesting too. Trying to think what else. Again, like Jim Nowell is in so much of Storytell Lies and Exaggerations, and he's just like not in this at all. And I feel like he's an integral part to the Sublime story. You know, he was there. He fucking bankrolled some of Sublime. You know, he bought the fucking van, dude. You know, like we need to hear more from him. I'm stoked the No Doubt guys were all the No Doubt heads were in it. I'm trying to think who else could have been in this that new Sublime. The Incubus dude, that one of the dudes from Incubus is in it. I thought that was pretty cool. I don't know. Again, no Mike Watt. You know, Sublime was heavily influenced by Mike Watt, or Minutemen were an influence on Sublime. Nothing. I guess I would have liked to have seen more musicians, like contemporaries, anybody who, frankly, Fat Mike from NoFX. That would have been a great interview to get. He was around at that time. You know, I'm sure Sublime and NoFX crossed paths more than once. So that would have been a great interview that we could have seen. There were just a bunch of people that they could have spoken to. I know I've said that like 100 times now. I told him how I got into his work, and I told him that I saw him in the same light as Elvis. And he loved that. That's awesome. We'll be heading out to see Morning Noise in October. Steve told me about that show since I told him I wanted to catch the show. Most of them near me were 21 plus. Whizbang, how old are you? You're under 21. That is, oh my God. Dude, Dan's bringing up a huge point. Dude, the Lords of Brooklyn, who toured with Sublime, they didn't even bring up Wesley Willis. Wesley Willis, dude. Like, none of that shit got brought up. Incubus opened for Sublime once or twice. Pretty sure they got their big break at one of those shows. You know who I would have liked to have heard from? This is kind of controversial and probably would make some people mad, but I'm just gonna, like, whatever. Fucking 311. I know 311 had a rivalry. Like, there was like a thing with Sublime, and they like had a lot of overlap, and they're kind of like fake Cali boys because they're really from like somewhere in Oklahoma or something. It would have been interesting to hear what they had to say about Sublime. So not necessarily, that's what I would have liked to have heard. That would have been interesting, the 311 guys. And I'm sure there was some stuff between them. They had a thing. Yeah, Whizbang is 19 going on 20. Third concert ever. Dude, I love that. Whizbang. Fuck, Whizbang. If you're 20, that means you were born in 2003. I feel so fucking old, bro. Dude, how are 20-year-olds born in 2003? That is so weird to me. That's awesome, though. Whizbang, I'm happy for you. And I'm glad you got to meet Glenn, and I'm glad you got to go see the Misfits and Danzig and all that. It's great. Freaking great. Is there anything else we haven't said about this? I feel like we've covered it. Listen, it looks like we got our Sublime cut out for us, right? We got more Sublime. We got some more Sublime to discuss. We're going to do Crazy Fool. I think that's the next step. Okay? That's the next step. So listen, if I didn't say it before, please leave some skulls in the live chat. Leave some skulls in the comments. Subscribe to the channel. Check out the Patreon. Check out the YouTube memberships. Make sure you like this video. Make sure you subscribe. Thank you for joining me on this very discombobulated. I really should have taken notes. I didn't take notes. I should have taken notes. That would have made this a lot easier. But thank you for joining me, and we will see you next time here at the Frumess channel. Peace and hair grease.